When the first rays of December sunlight pierced through the frost-covered windows of Windsor Castle, nobody could have predicted that this Christmas Day would become a defining moment for the royal family's most understated member. In a world where every royal appearance is scrutinized, photographed, and analyzed, one young woman was about to step into the spotlight in a way that would surprise everyone who thought they knew her story. The bells of St. Mary Magdalene Church were already echoing across the Norfolk countryside, calling the nation's most famous family to their annual Christmas tradition. But this year would be different. This year, Lady Louise Windsor would remind the world that sometimes the most powerful transformations happen when you least expect them, and that true elegance isn't just about what you wear, it's about who you choose to become. The morning air at Sandringham Estate carried the crisp bite of winter, mixed with the familiar scent of pine and wood smoke that had welcomed the royal family for generations. Lady Louise Windsor stood before the tall mirror in her bedroom, her reflection showing a young woman on the cusp of something significant. At 20 years old, she had spent most of her life deliberately staying in the background, content to let her more prominent cousins take center stage while she pursued her passions for carriage driving and literature. But today felt different. Today, as she carefully adjusted the deep emerald coat that had been hanging in her wardrobe for weeks, Louise felt a quiet confidence she hadn't experienced before. The coat itself was unremarkable by royal standards. Not a designer piece worth thousands, not borrowed from her grandmother's legendary collection, but something she had chosen herself during a rare solo shopping trip to London. The rich green fabric complemented her complexion beautifully, and the tailored cut gave her a sophisticated silhouette that seemed to announce her transition from teenager to young adult. Her lady's maid, Mrs. Henderson, had been with the family for 15 years and had watched Louise grow from a shy child with thick glasses into the poised young woman she was becoming. As she helped Louise with the final touches of her outfit, she noticed something different in the girl's demeanor. There was a new sense of purpose, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. The choice of accessories had taken Louise longer than usual. She had inherited several pieces of jewelry from her great-grandmother, but she wanted something that felt authentically her own. Finally, she selected a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to her late great-aunt, Princess Margaret, not because they were valuable or historically significant, but because Margaret had always been known for her independent spirit and refusal to conform to expectations. It seemed fitting. Downstairs, the rest of the family was gathering for their traditional Christmas morning routine. Prince William was helping his children with their coats, while Catherine ensured everyone looked presentable for the photographers who would be waiting outside the church. Prince Harry and Meghan had already departed for their own celebration in California, but their absence was felt in the careful way the remaining family members positioned themselves, understanding that today's photographs would be scrutinized for any signs of family dynamics or hidden meanings. Louise's parents, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, were known for their dedication to keeping their children as normal as possible despite their royal status. They had succeeded perhaps too well. Louise and her younger brother James had grown up largely out of the public eye, attending regular schools and participating in ordinary activities. But as Louise approached her 21st birthday, the reality of her position was becoming increasingly apparent. The walk from the main house to the waiting cars was always a moment of transformation for the royal family. Inside Sandringham, there was simply a large, sometimes complicated family dealing with the usual dynamics of relatives gathering for holidays. But the moment they stepped outside, they became symbols, representatives of an institution that had endured for over 1,000 years. Louise had made this walk countless times before, usually staying close to her parents or trailing behind her more confident cousins. But today something was different. As she emerged from the house, the winter sunlight caught the rich fabric of her coat, creating an almost ethereal glow around her figure. The waiting photographers, accustomed to focusing their lenses on the whale's children or the more senior royals, found themselves instinctively turning their cameras toward this suddenly radiant young woman. The choice to walk slightly ahead of her parents was subtle but significant. Louise had always been naturally graceful, a result of years of equestrian training, but today her movements seemed more purposeful, more confident. She acknowledged the small crowd of well-wishers with a warm smile that was entirely her own, not the practiced royal wave, but a genuine expression of gratitude for their Christmas morning dedication. In the car during the short journey to St. Mary Magdalene Church, Louise sat quietly between her parents, but her mind was active with thoughts she hadn't shared with anyone. She had been having increasingly frequent conversations with her grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, about her future role in the royal family. The Queen, despite her advanced age, remained sharp and perceptive, and she had been gently encouraging Louise to consider taking on more public duties. The conversation had begun several months earlier during one of their regular tea meetings. The Queen had observed that Louise possessed many of the qualities that made for an effective working royal: genuine compassion, intelligence, and an ability to connect with people from all backgrounds. But more importantly, she seemed to understand that royal duty was ultimately about service to others, not personal glory or attention. Louise had been resistant at first. She had watched her cousins William and Harry navigate the intense scrutiny that came with royal life, and she had seen how it could affect relationships, personal growth, and mental health. She valued her relative privacy and the freedom to make mistakes without them becoming front-page news. But gradually, she had begun to see that she might have something unique to offer. Her university experience at St. Andrews had been formative in this regard. While she had initially chosen the Scottish University partly because it offered a more normal student experience than some alternatives, she had discovered that her royal connection, when used thoughtfully, could open doors for causes she cared about. She had become involved with several charities focused on literacy and education, areas where her genuine passion shone through. The carriage driving, which many had seen as simply an expensive hobby for a privileged young woman, had also become a vehicle for broader purposes. Louise had begun visiting riding schools that worked with disabled children, and she had discovered a natural ability to inspire and encourage young people who faced physical or emotional challenges. Her own experience growing up with visual impairment had given her insight into the importance of not letting limitations define possibilities. As their car approached the church, Louise could see the familiar scene that played out every Christmas day. Hundreds of people, many who had traveled considerable distances, lined the path to the church entrance. Some had been coming for decades, viewing the royal family's Christmas traditions as part of their own holiday celebration. Others were tourists, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous family they had seen in countless photographs and news reports. But today, Louise noticed something different in how she was viewing the crowd. Instead of seeing them as a source of pressure or anxiety, she began to see them as individuals with their own stories, their own reasons for being there on Christmas morning. The elderly woman in the front row who clutched a small British flag had probably been attending these Christmas services for years, seeing it as a way to connect with something larger than herself. The young family with small children had likely planned this outing as a special Christmas adventure, something their children would remember for years to come. This shift in perspective was subtle but profound. Louise realized that her role, should she choose to embrace it more fully, wasn't really about her at all. It was about being part of something that brought meaning and continuity to other people's lives. The responsibility felt less burdensome when she understood it in these terms. The car came to a stop, and Louise could hear the familiar sound of cameras clicking and people calling out Christmas greetings. Her father, Prince Edward, gave her hand a gentle squeeze, a gesture that conveyed both support and understanding. Her mother, Sophie, smiled warmly at her, recognizing something different in her daughter's demeanor. As Louise stepped out of the car, the transformation that had been building throughout the morning reached its culmination. The young woman who emerged was still recognizably the same person who had grown up largely out of the public eye, but there was a new quality to her presence. She moved with quiet confidence, acknowledging the crowd with genuine warmth while maintaining the dignity that her position required. The photographers, who had covered dozens of these Christmas services, immediately recognized that something significant was happening. The images they were capturing showed not just another young royal fulfilling family obligations, but a young woman stepping into her own power and purpose. The emerald coat, which had seemed like a simple wardrobe choice that morning, now appeared to be a statement of intent, a declaration that Lady Louise Windsor was ready to be seen and heard. As the family made their way toward the church entrance, Louise found herself naturally falling in a step with her grandmother, Queen Elizabeth. The Queen, despite being in her mid-90s, maintained an impressive pace and bearing that commanded respect from all who saw her. But today, there was something particularly meaningful about the way she included Louise in the small conversations and gentle gestures that helped make these public appearances feel more human and less performative. The moment just before entering the church was always significant for the royal family. It represented the transition from the public spectacle outside to the more intimate act of worship within. For Louise, this threshold felt especially meaningful today. She was crossing not just from the outdoors to indoors, but from one phase of her life to another. The young woman who had awakened that morning uncertain about her place in the world was becoming someone who understood her potential to make a meaningful contribution to the institution she had been born into and the people it served. The interior of St. Mary Magdalene Church provided a stark but welcome contrast to the bustling energy outside. The ancient stone walls, decorated with simple Christmas arrangements of holly and ivy, created an atmosphere of peaceful reverence that seemed to envelope the royal family as they took their traditional places in the front pews. Louise had attended this service every Christmas for as long as she could remember, but today the familiar hymns and readings seemed to carry deeper meaning. Seated between her parents, Louise found her mind wandering not to the usual distractions of a young person enduring a religious service, but to more substantial contemplations about faith, duty, and purpose. The sermon, delivered by the local rector who had known the family for years, focused on the theme of service and how the Christmas story represented God's ultimate act of service to humanity. Louise couldn't help but draw parallels to her own situation. The idea that privilege and position were meant to be vehicles for helping others rather than sources of personal advantage. As the service progressed, Louise became aware that she was being watched, not just by the usual photographers positioned discreetly at the back of the church, but by other members of the congregation, by her family, and, most intriguingly, by her grandmother. The Queen's attention wasn't intrusive or demanding, but there was a quality of assessment in her glances, as if she were evaluating something she had long hoped to see. The Queen had been unusually reflective in recent months about the future of the monarchy and the younger generation who would need to carry its mission forward. While Prince William was being prepared for his eventual role as king, and Prince George represented the future of the direct line of succession, the Queen understood that the institution needed a broader foundation of committed, capable working royals to maintain its relevance and effectiveness. Louise represented something unique in this context. Unlike her cousins who had been groomed for public roles from early childhood, she had developed her character and capabilities outside the intense scrutiny that usually accompanied royal upbringing. This had given her a more authentic connection to ordinary experiences and challenges, something that could prove invaluable in a monarchy that needed to remain connected to the lives of regular citizens. When the service concluded and the family began to make their way back outside, Louise noticed that the crowd had grown larger during the hour they had been inside. Word had apparently spread about her striking appearance that morning, and social media was already buzzing with photographs and commentary about her transformation from background royal to someone who commanded attention. But the real test of Louise's newfound confidence came during the traditional walkabout that followed the church service. This informal interaction with the public had become an important part of the royal family's Christmas tradition, allowing ordinary citizens to have brief personal encounters with their monarch and her family. For Louise, who had previously found these interactions somewhat overwhelming, today presented an opportunity to put her evolving understanding of royal duty into practice. Her first conversation was with Mrs. Patricia Williams, an 84-year-old woman who had been attending the Christmas service for over 30 years. Mrs. Williams had brought her granddaughter Emma, age 7, who was meeting a member of the royal family for the first time. Louise knelt down to Emma's eye level, a gesture that immediately put the child at ease and demonstrated a natural instinct for connection that couldn't be taught. The conversation that followed was brief, but meaningful. Emma had been learning about horses at school and was excited to discover that Louise was involved in equestrian sports. Louise found herself describing her carriage driving in simple terms that the child could understand. But, more importantly, she listened carefully to Emma's own stories about the pony ride she had taken during a recent family vacation. What struck observers about this interaction was Louise's complete focus on the conversation at hand. There was no sense that she was performing for the cameras or going through the motions of royal duty. Instead, she seemed genuinely interested in connecting with these individuals and learning about their experiences. This authenticity was immediately apparent to everyone who witnessed it, from the family members watching nearby to the photographers capturing the moment. The conversations continued as Louise made her way through the crowd. She spoke with a teenage boy who was studying at a school where she had recently made an unofficial visit as part of her literacy charity work. She thanked a group of local volunteers who organized community events throughout the year. She admired the Christmas drawings that several children had brought to show the royal family, taking time to ask questions about their artistic choices and techniques. But perhaps the most significant interaction came when Louise met David Shun, a university student who was spending Christmas away from his family for the first time. David had come to the service partly out of curiosity and partly because he was feeling homesick and wanted to be part of a community celebration. When Louise learned about his situation, she took extra time to talk with him about his studies and his experiences adapting to life in a new country. This conversation revealed something important about Louise's character and potential as a working royal. Rather than offering platitudes or moving quickly to the next person, she demonstrated genuine empathy and took the time to understand David's individual circumstances. She shared her own experiences of feeling overwhelmed when she first started university, creating a moment of authentic human connection that transcended the usual boundaries between royalty and the public. The watching family members couldn't help but notice this development. Prince William, who had struggled with the performative aspects of royal duty when he was younger, recognized in Louise a natural ability to find meaning and satisfaction in these public interactions. Catherine, who had worked hard to develop her own confidence in royal engagements, saw in Louise a demonstration of how authenticity could be more powerful than perfection. Most significantly, Queen Elizabeth observed her granddaughter with growing satisfaction. The Queen had always believed that the most effective royals were those who could maintain their essential humanity while fulfilling their institutional roles. Too much focus on protocol and tradition could create distance from the people the monarchy was meant to serve, but too little attention to the dignity and continuity that royalty represented could undermine the institution's effectiveness. Louise seemed to be finding a natural balance between these competing demands. Her interactions were warm and genuine, but she never forgot her position or allowed the conversations to become inappropriately casual. She was dressed beautifully and carried herself with dignity, but she never seemed to use her appearance or status to create barriers between herself and the people she was meeting. As the walkabout continued, Louise found herself thinking about the conversation she had been having with her grandmother about her future role. The Queen had been careful not to pressure her, understanding that the decision to take on greater public responsibilities needed to come from Louise's own sense of calling rather than family obligation. But she had made it clear that there would be opportunities for Louise to contribute meaningfully to the royal family's work if she chose to embrace them. The media attention Louise was receiving today would undoubtedly intensify speculation about her future plans. Royal watchers and journalists were always eager to identify the next generation of working royals, and Louise's striking appearance and confident demeanor would fuel months of analysis and prediction. But for Louise, the more important consideration was whether she felt personally called to take on greater responsibilities and whether she believed she could make a meaningful contribution. The answer to both questions was becoming increasingly clear as the morning progressed. Each conversation with members of the public reinforced her growing understanding that royal duty, when approached with the right intentions, could be a vehicle for genuine service and connection. The privileges of her position, the education, resources, and platform that came with being born into the royal family, could be used to amplify important causes and bring attention to people and organizations doing valuable work. But there was also the personal satisfaction she was discovering in these interactions. Louise had always been somewhat introverted, comfortable with small groups and intimate conversations, but sometimes overwhelmed by large public gatherings. Today, however, she was finding that approaching these encounters with genuine curiosity about other people's experiences made them energizing rather than draining. The final conversation of the walkabout was with Sarah Mitchell, a single mother who had brought her 2 children to see the royal family despite the considerable expense and effort involved in traveling from their home in northern England. Sarah worked as a teaching assistant in a school that served an economically disadvantaged community, and she had saved for months to make this Christmas trip possible for her family. When Louise learned about Sarah's work and dedication, she found herself moved by the woman's commitment to education and her sacrifice to create special experiences for her children. The conversation evolved beyond pleasantries to a more substantive discussion about the challenges facing schools in underserved communities and the importance of literacy programs that Louise supported through her charitable work. This conversation crystallized something important for Louise. She realized that her emerging role as a working royal could create bridges between the privileged world she inhabited and the experiences of people like Sarah who were working every day to make positive differences in their communities with far fewer resources and advantages. As the family began to make their way back to the waiting cars, Louise felt a sense of completion about the morning's events. The transformation that had begun when she chose the emerald coat had evolved throughout the day into something more substantial and lasting. She was no longer the uncertain young woman who had struggled with questions about her place in the royal family. Instead, she was becoming someone who understood that her position could be a source of meaning and purpose rather than burden and obligation. The car ride back to Sandringham was filled with family conversations about the service, the crowd, and the various encounters each family member had experienced during the walkabout. But Louise found herself looking out the window at the Norfolk countryside, thinking about the conversations she would need to have in the coming days and weeks about her future role. There would be practical considerations to address, which charities to support, how to balance public duties with her education and personal interests, and how to work with the palace staff to develop a sustainable approach to royal engagements. But the fundamental question about whether she wanted to step into a more prominent role had been answered definitively during the morning's events. The young woman who had awakened that Christmas morning uncertain about her future was returning to Sandringham House with a clear sense of purpose and direction that would reshape not just her own life, but the future of the royal family itself. The afternoon at Sandringham House unfolded with the comfortable rhythm that had characterized royal Christmas celebrations for generations. The family gathered in the drawing room for their traditional gift exchange, a more intimate affair than the morning's public appearances, but no less significant for Louise's continuing transformation. As she sat surrounded by wrapping paper and the gentle conversation of her relatives, she found herself viewing even these familiar traditions through new eyes. Her gift to Queen Elizabeth this year had been chosen with particular care. A leather-bound journal filled with blank pages, accompanied by a handwritten note expressing her desire to document and learn from the stories of people she would meet in her emerging role as a working royal. The Queen's response to this gift was subtle but meaningful a knowing smile, and gentle squeeze of Louise's hand that conveyed understanding and approval without words. The Queen's gift to Louise was equally symbolic, though its significance wouldn't become fully apparent until later. It was a brooch that had belonged to Princess Alice, the Queen's grandmother, who had been known for her dedication to charitable work and her ability to connect with people from all walks of life. The accompanying note explained that Princess Alice had worn this brooch during many of her public engagements, and it had come to represent her commitment to using her position for service rather than ceremony. As the afternoon progressed into early evening, Louise found herself drawn into a series of conversations that seemed to naturally evolve toward discussions of her future. Prince William, perhaps recognizing a kindred spirit in someone else who had initially struggled with the weight of royal expectations, offered insights about finding authentic ways to fulfill public duties. He spoke about how parenthood had helped him understand that royal work was ultimately about creating a better world for future generations, not just maintaining traditions from the past. Catherine's perspective proved equally valuable, particularly her observations about how authenticity and genuine interest in others could transform even the most formal royal engagements into meaningful experiences. She had watched Louise throughout the morning and recognized something that Louise herself was only beginning to understand, that she possessed a natural ability to make others feel heard and valued, a quality that couldn't be taught, but was essential for effective royal work. But it was the extended conversation with Queen Elizabeth that evening that proved most transformative for Louise. After dinner, as the family dispersed to various activities around the estate, the Queen invited Louise to join her for tea in her private sitting room. This wasn't unusual. Grandmother and granddaughter had shared many such conversations over the years, but tonight felt different. The Queen began by acknowledging what everyone had observed during the morning's events. Louise had demonstrated a natural grace and genuine connection with the public that suggested she might be ready to take on greater responsibilities. But more importantly, she seemed to have discovered something essential about royal duty that many never fully grasp, that it's not about being admired or maintaining privilege, but about being useful. The conversation that followed was unlike any Louise had experienced with her grandmother. The Queen spoke candidly about her own journey from reluctant young woman thrust into queenship by her father's unexpected death to someone who had found profound meaning and satisfaction in royal service. She described the early years when every public appearance felt like a performance and how gradually she had learned to find genuine purpose in the work. The Queen also shared her observations about what made some royals more effective than others. Technical skills could be learned, how to give speeches, navigate protocol, and handle media attention. But the essential qualities that made royal work meaningful couldn't be taught. They included genuine curiosity about others, the ability to make people feel valued regardless of their circumstances, and, most importantly, the understanding that royal privilege was a tool for service rather than an end in itself. Louise found herself opening up about her own struggles and discoveries in ways she had never done before, even with her parents. She described how her university experience had begun to show her how her position could be used to support causes she cared about. She talked about her work with literacy charities and how meaningful it had felt to see how her involvement could bring attention and resources to important programs. Most significantly, she shared her growing realization that the aspects of royal life she had always found intimidating, the public scrutiny, the formal events, the constant photography, might be less burdensome if she understood them as necessary components of something larger and more meaningful. The Queen listened with the patience and attention that had made her an effective monarch for over 70 years. When Louise finished speaking, there was a moment of comfortable silence before the Queen shared something that would remain with Louise for the rest of her life. She explained that every generation of royals faced the choice between seeing their position as a burden to be endured or an opportunity to be embraced. Those who chose the former might fulfill their basic obligations, but they would never find satisfaction or meaning in their role. Those who chose the latter often discovered that royal duty, despite its challenges and limitations, could provide a uniquely fulfilling way to contribute to society. The Queen made it clear that Louise faced no pressure to immediately take on extensive public duties. She was still young, still completing her education, and still entitled to make her own choices about her future. But if she did choose to embrace a more prominent role, she would have the full support of the family and institution, along with the resources and guidance needed to be effective. As their conversation drew to a close, the Queen made one final observation that crystallized the day's experiences for Louise. She noted that the most successful royals were those who could remain fundamentally themselves while fulfilling their institutional role. Louise had demonstrated that morning that she could maintain her authentic personality and genuine care for others while also carrying herself with the dignity and grace that her position required. Later that evening, Louise found herself walking alone through the halls of Sandringham House, processing the day's events and the implications for her future. The same corridors that had witnessed generations of royal celebrations and decisions now provided the setting for her own moment of clarity about her path forward. The photographs from a morning were already appearing in newspapers and online, accompanied by commentary about her transformation and speculation about her future role. But for Louise, the external attention was less important than the internal shift she had experienced. She had discovered something about herself and about the possibility of finding meaning and purpose in royal duty that would fundamentally alter her relationship with her position and responsibilities. Her conversation with her parents that night was emotional, but also filled with pride and excitement. Prince Edward and Sophie had always hoped their daughter would find her own way to contribute meaningfully to the royal family's work, but they had been careful not to push her toward decisions she wasn't ready to make. Seeing her confidence and clarity about her future direction filled them with satisfaction and anticipation for what she might accomplish. The final conversation of the evening was with her younger brother James, who had watched his sister's transformation throughout the day with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. James was still several years away from facing similar decisions about his own role in the royal family, but Louise's example was already showing him that there were authentic and meaningful ways to approach royal duty. As Louise finally prepared for bed that night, she found herself looking again at the emerald coat that had started the day's transformation. What had seemed like a simple wardrobe choice that morning now felt like a symbol of her decision to step more fully into her role and identity as a working member of the royal family. But more than the coat or the jewelry or the media attention, what Louise would remember about this Christmas day was the series of conversations and connections that had helped her understand her potential to make a meaningful contribution. The elderly woman who had shared stories about her grandchildren, the homesick student who had found comfort in conversation, the dedicated teacher who had sacrificed to give her children a special experience. These encounters had shown Louise that royal duty could be a bridge between different worlds and experiences. The young woman who had awakened uncertain about her place in the royal family was ending the day with a clear sense of purpose and direction. The transformation that had begun with the choice of what to wear had evolved into something much more substantial, a commitment to using her position and privileges in service of others, and a confidence that she could fulfill this role while remaining authentically herself. As she drifted off to sleep, Louise was already beginning to envision the conversation she would have in the coming weeks with palace staff about expanding her charitable work and public engagements. There would be challenges ahead, learning to navigate increased media attention, balancing public duties with her personal life and education, and developing expertise in the causes she wanted to champion. But the foundation had been laid during this remarkable Christmas day. Lady Louise Windsor had discovered that stepping into the spotlight didn't require losing herself, but rather finding the most authentic and purposeful version of herself. The journey from background royal to confident young woman ready to serve was complete, and The next chapter of her story was ready to begin.